My husband forbade me from opening the basement safe. After he died, I cracked it open and found evidence I never knew. Under the heavy ceiling of that church hall, I sat in the farthest corner, folding my hands, trying not to be seen, even on the day of my husband's funeral. People came in black, whispered condolences, dabbed their eyes with silk handkerchiefs, but no one looked at me. Not one person came to ask how I was holding up, not even my own son. They say he died in his sleep, peacefully. That's what the doctor signed off on, but I knew better. He didn't die with peace. He died with rage stuck in his throat. And I, his wife of 40 years, wasn't allowed to sit near his casket. They sat me in the kitchen. That's where I watched my husband's body leave the house. Through the narrow gap of the swinging door between the pantry and the hallway. Better keep her out of sight, my daughter-in-law muttered, not quietly. She's just going to start moaning for attention. My granddaughter leaned in closer and whispered, Mom, why's Grandma sitting out here like a stray dog? It's so embarrassing. Another guest, I didn't even know her, looked me up and down, then asked where she could hang her coat. She thought I was the maid. I didn't answer. I just kept hearing his voice, over and over, like the creaking of an old floorboard no one bothers to fix. Don't ever open that basement safe. It's not for women, especially not for a black woman like you. That's what he told me. Not once, but 100 times. The basement was his world, he said. Mine was the kitchen. Then my son walked in, still dressed in his crisp black suit. He didn't look at the casket, didn't glance toward me. He walked straight across the hall, pulled out a folder, and dropped it onto the table in front of me, like it was a bill overdue. Sign here, Mom. I looked up. He didn't blink. This is the house transfer. You've lived here long enough. Dad paid for it. You just occupied it. Time to move on. I didn't reach for the pen. I just looked at him, really looked at him, and that's when he hissed through his teeth, eyes burning. You've done nothing for this family. You were a mistake. You think Dad ever wanted to stay? You think you were more than a one-night accident that ruined his life? He leaned in close, and I could smell the cologne he wore on his wedding day. Dad told me, you were a leech, a mouth to feed. You trapped him. If it weren't for your pregnancy, he'd have had a real life. Not this pitiful joke. You're nothing but a shadow. A maid who got a wedding ring. I felt every word like a slap across my face, but I didn't let my hand tremble. I looked into his eyes, and I didn't flinch, because I remembered the last night his father spoke. It was 1 week ago. The house smelled like whiskey and sweat. He stormed into the kitchen, shirt halfway unbuttoned, eyes bloodshot, breath reeking of poison. You disgusting slut, he spat. You ever go near that basement safe, and I swear to God, I'll bury you in there myself. I didn't speak. I had learned long ago that speaking only made the blows worse. But that night, he didn't slap me. No, he did something more theatrical. He threw the entire glass bottle of Jack Daniels. It hit my forehead, shattered. I felt the sting, the warmth, and then the silence. Blood pooled near my temple as I slumped against the sink. My son found me there. He looked down, not horrified, not angry, just shrugged. Serves you right, he said, and walked away. No hospital, no help. I bandaged my own wound, cleaned the broken glass, mopped up the blood before the morning. That's when I knew. I was utterly alone in this. Alone with a basement I had never entered, a safe I had never touched, a marriage I had never truly understood. I had been forbidden from that safe for 40 years, told it was for men's business, that it had tax files, firearms, maybe even gambling debts. I had always assumed there was something sinful down there, but never anything about me. And yet, that safe was always locked, always guarded. It took me 4 decades to realize the only prison in this house wasn't the basement. It was my silence. So the night after the funeral, I stood at the top of the basement stairs, hand on the railing, heart full of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Resolve. Because if you feel justice deserves celebration, smash that hype button. Let us keep stories like this alive, echoing far, far away. Your support helps us bring understanding and love to those who deserve it. Thank you so much. Keep listening. I walked down into that basement. I opened the safe. And in that moment, quiet, cold, alone, I lost my husband for the second time. I used to be loved, truly, deeply loved. Not the kind of love that needs to be shouted from rooftops or plastered on greeting cards, but the kind that makes you feel seen. David saw me. Not as a black girl in a white town, not as a maid's daughter, not as a charity case. He saw me as a woman, as his woman, his black pearl, he used to whisper, brushing my cheek. The rarest jewel I've ever held. Back then, I was 19, he was 23. We met at the small corner library where I volunteered, sorting returned books and dusting shelves no one touched. He came in every Tuesday for books he never finished. We started with stolen glances, then shared smirks, then conversation. A month later, he brought me a single gardenia and told me he'd never met anyone like me. Our love was quiet but fierce. We knew the world wouldn't be kind, but we didn't care. His father threatened to cut him off. His mother refused to attend our wedding. At our ceremony, there were more empty chairs than full ones. I wore a borrowed dress and a trembling smile. But I believed we had each other, and that was enough. For a little while, it really was. The first few weeks were tender. He'd kiss my forehead every morning before work. He'd rub my shoulders when I cooked. We'd lie in bed and talk about our future, children, a small home by the sea, a garden I could tend barefoot. He made me feel safe. But then came the silence. First, it was forgetting to kiss me goodbye. Then, not coming home for dinner. The smell of whiskey on his clothes, the flash of anger in his eyes. He'd toss his keys onto the floor and bark, "What the hell is this slop?" Even when I made his favorite dish. I remember the first time he slapped me. We were 3 months married. He'd misplaced a client folder and blamed me for moving it. I told him I hadn't touched it. "Don't lie to me, you black bitch," he snarled, and the back of his hand met my cheek. The sting wasn't just physical, it was betrayal. This was the man who had once knelt to kiss my feet. He cried afterward, begged for forgiveness, said he was drunk, stressed, confused, and like a fool, I believed him. It didn't stop there. The slaps turned into punches, the insults into long rants that spilled through walls and across holidays. He'd humiliate me at dinners. She burned the roast again. He'd laugh to his friends. But what can you expect from a woman who barely had running water growing up? His mother adored those moments. She'd smirk at me with smug satisfaction, saying, "Told you, son, that kind only brings shame." Sometimes she'd whisper things to me when we were alone. "He married down," she'd say. "It's only natural he regrets it." I never told anyone. Who would I tell? The police in our town looked like her brothers. The pastor said marriage was sacred and private. Even the women at church said, "You should be grateful you have a man at all." I convinced myself it was a phase, that the David I loved was still in there, somewhere, behind the liquor and the bruises and the hate. I prayed for him. I cooked his meals just right. I smiled when he walked in the door. I did everything a good wife was supposed to do. But he never came back. Because he wasn't David. Not the man I married. Not the man who called me his black pearl with a tremble in his voice. Somewhere deep down, I always felt it. There was something missing behind his eyes, a gap in memory. A subtle change in how he held his fork. The way he once said he hated jazz when I knew David used to hum Coltrane in the shower. I ignored it. Because acknowledging it meant accepting something unthinkable. That I had shared a bed with a stranger. That I had built a life, suffered beatings, borne a child with a man who had stolen someone else's name, someone else's face, someone else's soul. It wasn't until I opened the basement safe that I understood the truth. And when I saw what was inside, I didn't just lose my breath. After David died, the house did not fall silent. It turned colder. The warmth I once imagined might return with his absence never came. If anything, the chill deepened. My son, the only child I had raised through nights of bruises and whispered lullabies, now looked at me like I was the last thing in his way. 3 days after the funeral, he sat me down in the living room, his father's chair beneath him, his fingers steepled like he had been rehearsing this all along. "We've discussed this," he said. "Me and Madison think it's time for a change." Madison, his wife, the one who winced every time I coughed, the one who changed the kitchen locks while I was out on a walk and said it was an accident. He slid the papers across the table. "House transfer. You sign, we let you stay here a few more months until we find you a nice facility." I looked down at the form. My name was printed there like a footnote. "A legal inconvenience. Your father left the house in my name," I said quietly. He smirked. "Technically, it was a joint asset, and now he's gone. Time for the living to move on. You'll be comfortable in a place with people your age." "And what about this place?" I asked. He shrugged. "It's too big for you. We want to remodel. Make it more our style. Madison's planning a sunroom where your sewing room is now." I said nothing. because I knew if I spoke, my voice would shake, and I would not give him that. He leaned back in the chair, loosened his tie, and added, "Of course, if you make this difficult, things can get messy. Guardianship hearings, medical evaluations. I mean, you're not as sharp as you used to be, are you?" I knew what he was doing. Gaslighting, dehumanizing, the same game his father played, only now dressed in legal language and veiled threats. And through it all, the basement door remained locked. The key had never been given to me. It had hung on David's key ring like a relic of power, something sacred and hidden. Even when we were newlyweds, he'd said, "That part of the house is mine. You've got the kitchen, the laundry, the guest room. Let a man keep one thing for himself." The door was thick oak, reinforced, unpainted, unlike the rest of the trim. It creaked like it held secrets in its joints. Every time I passed it, something inside me stirred, a low whisper of curiosity and dread. Once, years ago, I tried to jiggle the handle while he was out. The key wasn't hard to find, but the moment I turned it, he came storming in from nowhere, like the devil himself had sniffed my intention. He yanked the key from my hand and growled, "Do that again, and I swear you'll regret ever stepping foot in this house." After that, I never tried again. Not out of fear, though there was plenty of that, but because I was tired of hoping there was something good behind that door. I chose to believe it was empty, that it held nothing but boxes and old tools, that it didn't matter. But after his death, it mattered more than ever, because now my son stood in the same spot, saying the same words. "That room isn't for you, Mom," he said as he caught me glancing at the door one afternoon. "Dad told me, that safe's got nothing in it for you, nothing you'd understand." And I wondered, how did he know what was in there? He had never been allowed in either, or so I thought. I started noticing things, times when he'd disappear for an hour, when the keyring was missing from its usual place. One morning I found dust displaced on the basement doorknob, fingerprints not mine. Something was being hidden, not just from me, but from the world. And yet, I was still expected to mop floors, cook meals, wash sheets. At 78 years old, I was once again the unpaid servant of a house I built with my own hands, the woman who birthed the man now plotting to take her life apart, one signature at a time. I wasn't allowed to have opinions. If I mentioned the past, they called it rambling. If I asked about the bills, they said it was being controlling. If I spent too long in the backyard, they said it was unsafe. It was as if my memories had become a threat. My silence wasn't enough anymore. Now, they wanted my obedience. One night, I overheard Madison on the phone. "Once we get her into the home, we'll finally redo the basement. Can't wait to see what's behind that damn safe. Must be something big for the old man to guard it like a dragon." That was the moment something inside me snapped back into place. For years, I had convinced myself that whatever was behind that door wasn't mine, that I had no right to know, that it was safer not to dig. But now I understood. I was never meant to know, because I was always supposed to stay small, stay grateful, stay silent. That basement wasn't just off limits. It was a vault for everything they never wanted me to remember. And I was done forgetting. I had survived beatings, betrayal, and a marriage built on lies. I had bent my back until it curved like the crescent moon, just to keep peace in a house that never offered me shelter. But I wasn't bending anymore. Not for them. Not for secrets. Not even for fear. The night I finally touched the basement doorknob again, it was not curiosity that drove me. It was something far sharper. Resolve. It was well past midnight when I made my move. The house had settled into its usual silence, Madison's shallow breathing down the hall, my son's snores low and rattling through the vents like a warning. But I had waited too long, too many years, too many bruises. That night, I felt no fear, only purpose. I crept into the hall closet and reached into the lining of the old camel-colored coat my husband used to wear every winter. He had never worn it after the stroke in his hand made the buttons too difficult to manage, but he refused to throw it out, said it still had secrets to hold. That line haunted me. My fingers found the hidden stitch immediately. I had mended that coat. I knew its every fold. Inside, there was a small, tarnished key, one I hadn't seen in over 4 decades. I held it like it might burn me, like the metal itself knew what it had locked away. I went downstairs, heart steady for the first time in years. The floorboards moaned beneath me, the same way they always did, but tonight, I didn't flinch. I turned on the basement light. The yellow bulb flickered to life, casting long shadows across the stairs. The safe sat there, where it always had, embedded in the concrete wall like a steel heart. I knelt. My knees cracked, my hands trembled as I slipped the key into the lock. Click. It opened with a sigh, as if the house itself had been holding its breath. Inside was no stack of cash, no legal documents, no weapons. There was only a thin, black leather folder, and when I opened it, the world I knew crumbled. Beside me stood the man I had loved, the real one, not the imposter buried under stolen vows. This man, he looked like David. Same bone structure, same jawline, same hairline. But his eyes, my God, his eyes, they were soft, loving, the kind of eyes that used to call me my black pearl and mean it. I dropped the photo, heart pounding. My hands dug deeper into the folder. Next came the passports, 2 of them. One read, David William Greystone. The other, Daniel Walter Greystone, twin brothers. I stared at the birth dates, same day, same hospital. Their baby photos were tucked in as well, David with a small dimple on his left cheek, Daniel with none, and then, folded neatly behind the passports, was a letter. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded, but I would have recognized that handwriting anywhere. Dearest Pearl, it read, I do not know if you will ever read this. I do not know if you are still alive, or safe, or free. But if you have found this letter, then it means something survived. You survived. And that means hope is still alive. Daniel took everything from me. My name, my life, my face. He wanted you from the start. He told me so. Said I didn't deserve someone like you. That I was wasting my life on a girl who didn't know her place. He drugged me the night before our wedding. I woke up somewhere I didn't recognize, and by the time I escaped, it was too late. He had already taken my vows, my home, my future. But I never stopped loving you. You are my only reason to stay alive. You are the rarest woman I have ever known. My black pearl. If you are reading this, please, please find someone who can help. Love always, David. I could not breathe. My knees buckled. I sat down right there on the concrete floor, letter clutched to my chest like a heartbeat. The man I had lived with for 40 years, the man who had spat at me, called me a whore, beaten me senseless, was not my husband. He was his brother, a stranger. And the real David, the man who once kissed my hand in the dark and whispered that I made the stars look dim, he was out there, somewhere, waiting, hoping. 40 years of silence, of pain, of lies. I thought of every moment that had not made sense, his sudden change after the wedding, the way he flinched when I played Coltrane, how he forgot the name of the dog we buried together, how his mother had smiled so smugly when he turned cruel. She knew. They all knew. I had been a prisoner in my own home, not just of a cruel man, but of a grand deceit, and I had been too afraid, too beaten down, to open the one door that would have told me everything, until now. I picked up the photograph again, and I wept, not because I was broken, but because I had finally begun to remember who I was. I was not a maid, not a mistake, not a burden. I was a woman loved so fiercely that even after 40 years of separation, my husband still wrote me letters, still called me his black pearl. And now, I was going to bring him home. I almost missed it. The flash drive. It was tucked inside the lining of the leather folder, folded so seamlessly between the stitching that I had to run my fingers along the edge twice before I felt the small, hard curve beneath the fabric. It was small, black, no label, just a single USB stick with a red mark on one side, barely visible unless you knew to look for it. I took it upstairs that night, hands still shaking from what I had already discovered. I waited until the house fell asleep again, until the sighs of the walls quieted and the night fell back into its usual hush. Then I turned on the old laptop. My son insisted I was too old to use, the one they kept in the guest room, dusty and slow. When the screen lit up, I inserted the drive. One file, a video file. It asked for a password. My heart beat in my ears. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I typed the date of our wedding, the 11th of June, 1977. The file unlocked. The screen went black for a moment, then grainy footage flickered to life. A man sat in a dimly lit room, concrete walls, one flickering bulb overhead. He was seated in a chair with metal cuffs binding his wrists. His hands trembled, the skin spotted with age, his frame alarmingly thin. But those eyes, God, those eyes. I knew them like I knew my own reflection. Pearl, he said. His voice cracked like dry wood, but it was him. Pearl, if you're watching this, it means I failed. Or maybe I finally got lucky and someone found a way to show you the truth. I don't know anymore. Days are long here. I don't always remember where I am. He coughed, a harsh, grating sound that shook his whole body. My name is David Greystone. I was, supposed to be your husband. But my brother, Daniel, he took everything from me. He blinked, tears forming at the corners of his sunken eyes. The night before our wedding, he came to my room. I thought he wanted to talk. He brought a bottle of wine, said he was finally ready to make peace. We laughed for the first time in years, and then the room spun. David looked down. Shame painted every line of his face. I woke up in a moving truck, hands tied, mouth taped. A man I didn't know drove for hours. I was handed off like a sack of grain, moved through towns, borders, countries, until I was here, somewhere in Central America, Guatemala, I think. He swallowed hard. I begged them to let me send a letter to you, but they laughed, said no one would care, said Daniel had already married you, said I was a ghost. He closed his eyes for a moment, then looked back at the camera. Pearl, I watched from afar as Daniel built a life that wasn't his. I was allowed to live, but only if I sent money. They gave me odd jobs, dangerous jobs, made me work in conditions no man should survive, and each month, the money was wired out, not to help me, but to make sure I stayed useful. He paused. And then I saw him, our son. My breath caught. David continued, his voice growing more brittle. He came here once, just once. I recognized him immediately. He didn't recognize me. Or maybe he did, but he didn't care. He handed me an envelope, said if I stopped cooperating, things would get worse. He looked me in the eye and said, "You got lucky we didn't bury you back in 1977. I covered my mouth with both hands. My own child, David whispered, used me like a resource, like a cash machine. He leaned forward in the chair, the chain rattling softly. I don't blame you. I never blamed you. I know you didn't know. But if you've found this pearl, if there's still a part of you that remembers me, please, please tell the world. Let them know I existed. Let them know I didn't leave you. I was stolen. I was erased." He began to cry then, not loud, but quietly, like a man who had nothing left to protect. "You were the best thing I ever had, the best woman I ever knew. You are not a burden. You are not what they made you believe." The screen flickered. The video ended. I sat in that room for what felt like hours. I did not cry. I could not. There were no tears left in me. Only fire. Only rage. Everything made sense now. The change in his eyes, the cruelty, the disdain for music, the way my son echoed his father's bitterness, as if born from a seed of resentment. They had built a life on a grave. My life. David had survived hell so that the imposter could enjoy comfort. And my son, our son, had chosen to serve the man who wore his father's face, but none of his soul. That was the night I stopped being afraid. That was the night I remembered who I had been before the beatings, before the silence, before the lies. I had been a woman who once inspired poetry. I had been someone worth stealing. And now, I would become someone they would regret underestimating. I had just closed the laptop, my hands still trembling from what I had seen, when the door swung open with a violent crack. The frame rattled. My son stood there, his shadow spilling across the room like a stain. His eyes were sharp and gleaming, his breath fast. He must have been listening outside the door. Maybe he always did. "What the hell are you doing?" he barked, stepping inside. His voice was deeper than usual, almost a growl. "You went where you shouldn't have gone." Before I could move, before I could even reach for the USB still warm in the port, he lunged forward. His hand shot out, snatched the drive, yanked it so hard the laptop tipped. He held the small stick between two fingers as if it were a dead bug. Then, without a pause, he hurled it to the floor and ground it under his heel until it cracked and splintered. "You shouldn't know," he said. His voice wasn't loud now. It was low, cold, like a knife pressed against the skin. "You were never supposed to know." I stared at him. My son, my only child, the baby I had held against my chest while my bruises still ached from his father's fists, the boy I had fed from my own hunger, clothed from my own bare back. His face was unreadable now, as if the boy I'd known had been replaced by something else. "You think you're clever, don't you? You think you found some grand truth in that safe, he smirked. You don't even know half of it. Then tell me, I said quietly. My voice didn't tremble. I would not give him that. He stared at me for a long time. Then, almost casually, he sat down on the edge of the bed. Fine. You want the truth? Here it is. I've known since I was a kid, Daniel told me himself. Told me he wasn't your husband, not really. That my real father was weak, that he'd been taken care of. He said he saved you from a life of poverty and shame. I believed him. He looked at me, eyes glittering. I liked having a father who wasn't weak, a father who taught me power, who showed me how to take what you want instead of begging for scraps. I felt my stomach turn. You knew David was alive, I whispered. You knew he was alive all these years. He tilted his head. Alive. Dead. What's the difference? He was gone, and he was useful. He worked. He sent money. Daniel made sure of that. You had a roof over your head. I had schooling. We built a life. A life built on betrayal, I said. On vows that were never his to take. He leaned closer. Don't get righteous now, Mother. You played along. You kept your mouth shut. You loved your big house, didn't you? I stared into his face and saw nothing of David. Nothing of the man who once held me like I was precious. I saw only Daniel's shadow, coiled around the boy like a vine, twisting him until he was something unrecognizable. He exhaled slowly. You know what the plan was, right? Before Daniel died, we were going to renovate the basement, turn it into a studio, but not before you took a little trip down there yourself. My heart stopped. What do you mean? He smiled. A thin, cruel smile. I almost put you there myself. Lock you in. A small fire, maybe. Old wiring. Everyone would think the old lady got careless. A tragic accident. Insurance pays out. House goes to me. Daniel gets his cut. Clean. Simple. He stood, looming over me. But then the old man dropped dead. Stupid. Heart gave out before we could finish it. And now here you are, sticking your nose where it doesn't belong. He lifted his hand and struck me across the face. Hard. My head snapped to the side. The sting burned my skin, but I didn't cry. I didn't fall. I just looked back at him, steady, because he didn't know. He didn't know that 3 nights ago, after the FBI tip line, all with one instruction: if anything happens to me, open immediately. I dabbed the corner of my mouth, tasting the iron tang of blood. You think you're clever, I said softly. You think you're powerful. His nostrils flared. I am powerful. Without me, you're nothing. A senile old woman no one believed. Maybe, I said. But even senile old women know how to make copies. He froze. I watched the realization creep across his face like a slow shadow. The arrogance faltered. The smirk slipped. You, he began, but stopped. I straightened my back, ignoring the ache in my spine. I am not afraid of you, I said. Not anymore. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The house seemed to hold its breath. Then he turned, muttering something under his breath, and stormed out of the room, slamming the door so hard the frame cracked. I sat on the bed, my cheek throbbing, and let the silence settle again. I didn't need to chase him. The fuse was already lit. The truth was already in motion. He thought he had cornered me, but he had no idea the world outside these walls already knew everything. I did not scream. I did not storm into police stations or call every news outlet in a fury. That was never my way. After 40 years of surviving in silence, I knew one truth better than anything else. Sometimes the loudest justice is served in complete quiet. 3 days after he hit me, I met with someone I hadn't seen in over 30 years, Louise Turner. We were roommates back in college, back when I still believed in futures, back before life taught me otherwise. She had gone on to become a lawyer, then a judge, then a retiree who gardened and played bridge on Tuesdays. But the fire in her had never gone out. And when I handed her the copies of the documents, the passports, the letter, the photograph, and what I had left of the video, she said only one thing: this will be the loudest silence we ever orchestrated. She made a few calls, the kind of calls that don't go through public switchboards. Within a week, federal agents were at my door. The FBI listened for hours. They interviewed me, reviewed the timeline, the documents, the people involved. They did not dismiss me. They did not condescend. They looked at the chain of evidence and nodded slowly, like men who had seen enough of the world to know truth when it walked in with bruises. The video, even in fragments, was enough. They brought in forensic analysts to restore parts of it, And Louise, God bless her, found someone at an international NGO who had connections in Central America. A humanitarian task force picked up the scent. It took almost 10 months of paperwork, red tape, and quiet negotiations with local law enforcement in Guatemala. But then, one morning in early spring, I got a phone call. "We found him," the voice on the line said. My knees gave out. I slid to the floor of the kitchen, clutching the edge of the table with one hand. "He's alive. Malnourished, injured, but alive." David had been found in a makeshift labor camp outside Coban. He had been listed as William Gray, an alias assigned to him by his captors. He was blind in one eye, had 2 fractured ribs that never healed right, and could no longer walk without a cane. But when they showed him a photo of me, tears rolled down his sunken cheeks. He whispered my name, Pearl. The nation exploded. My story, our story, was everywhere. The stolen groom, they called it. The widow who wasn't. A lifetime of lies. Newscasters debated our case across network. Pundits speculated. Activists rallied. Survivors came forward with similar tales. And when the trial was finally set, the courthouse looked like a media circus. The prosecution had everything. My son's travel log, bank transfer, voice messages, insurance papers he'd signed, a half-finished email draft on his laptop where he outlined the accidental fire that would explain my disappearance. He was indicted for conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and aiding and abetting kidnapping across international borders. His defense team tried to claim diminished capacity, emotional manipulation, ignorance, but the jury saw through it. I took the stand on the 4th day of trial. The room was packed. Journalists lined the back wall. Cameras flashed so often the air seemed to strobe. I walked slowly to the witness box, dressed in navy blue, hair pinned, spine straight. He wouldn't look at me. My son, the boy I raised, the man who betrayed me. He sat there, jaw clenched, in a suit 2 sizes too tight for his ego. And when the prosecutor asked if I had anything to say to him, I turned to face him fully, and I said, "I am not here for revenge. I am here because I did not forget." I looked out over the courtroom, steady, clear. I remembered every slight, every bruise, every lie told to my face. I remembered the wedding vows I made to a man who never got to speak his. I remembered the years I stayed silent so that my child could eat, could grow, could believe the world was safe. I turned back to him. "You tied your future to a man who stole everything from me. And now you're being dragged down by the same rope he used to hang me in silence." He looked up at me then, for the first time. There was no remorse, only rage. But it didn't reach me. I had built an armor out of pain, and he could not touch it now. After I stepped down, the judge asked if I wanted to make a final statement to the court. I nodded. I've lived long enough to see that the truth is not loud. It waits, and it sharpens. I looked at the jury, at the nation. I didn't shout. I remembered. And sometimes, remembering is the sharpest weapon of all. The courtroom was quiet when I walked out. But outside, the world roared. And somewhere, thousands of miles away, David was packing a small suitcase, his passport in hand, ready to board a plane home. Boston Logan International Airport was a sea of movement, families reuniting, lovers embracing, children clinging to legs in airport reunions that looked like movie ending. But I stood still, steady, as the world moved around me. 1 year had passed. 1 year since the trial, since the sentence, since the cameras stopped calling, and the crowds stopped staring, since my name stopped trending, and I was allowed to breathe again, not as a victim, but as a woman rediscovered. I clutched a bouquet of white gardenias, David's favorite. My fingers trembled, not from fear this time, but from something softer, something unfamiliar. Hope. They had warned me he'd look different. The doctors, the agents, the caseworker who had stayed in touch all year, they told me he'd be thinner, slower, weaker than I remembered. But they didn't tell me what it would feel like to see his eyes again. The glass doors slid open with a soft whoosh, and there he was. David. My David. Not the imposter who wore his face, not the shadow who stole his life. The real man, the one who once traced the curve of my neck like a map back home. The one who had called me his black pearl and meant it with every breath. He emerged carefully, each step measured, leaning on a cane, shoulders bowed by time. But when he looked up, when his eyes found mine, the world stopped moving. It was the same gaze from all those years ago in the library aisle, the one that undressed my fears and clothed me in belonging. There was age in it now, and pain, but underneath it all, there was still love, undimmed, undoubted. He paused 10 feet away. I took a breath that felt like my first in decades, and then he whispered, barely loud enough to reach me, but I heard it like thunder. Because of you, I kept going. I kept hoping. I kept breathing. For the day I'd see you again, my one and only black pearl. His voice cracked. Thank you for saving me. I moved before I knew I had moved. The flowers fell from my hand, scattering petals across the terminal floor. I reached him, wrapped my arms around him, and felt him collapse into me, not from weakness, but from the weight of all that had been carried alone for too long. We stood there, just holding each other, letting 40 years pass between our hands, our arms, our breath. No cameras, no reporters, no more lies, no more basement doors or safe locks or whispered threats in the middle of the night. Just the two of us. Older, yes, broken in places, but not destroyed. He pulled back just slightly to touch my face. You haven't changed, he said. I laughed, wet with tears. You liar. I had to lie, he said, smiling softly. I need one more chance to be your husband. You already are, I said. You always were. We left the airport hand in hand. There was no grand parade, no flashing lights, just a cab driver who smiled at us like he knew, like he understood. Back at home, I had cleared the guest room, made it his, filled it with soft blankets and his old record. I made his favorite soup that night, the one he'd always asked for on Sundays. And as we sat at the kitchen table, across from one another, he reached out and placed his hand over mine. This time, he said, we live for us, and we did. No more hiding, no more surviving. We planted gardenias in the backyard. We listened to jazz at dusk. We read together in silence, and I learned to rest my eyes with peace in the house I had once feared. And when people asked about us, I didn't tell them the whole story. I just said, we waited. But now, we're home. Because some love stories are born in fire, some are buried in silence, and some are stolen, only to be found again. Too late, some might say. But for us, it was exactly the right time. And this time, it was forever. If you've stayed with me till the end, thank you, from the depths of a heart that's seen too much and survived even more. This wasn't just a story about betrayal or even justice. It was about how love, real love, endures, even when it's buried, broken, or stolen, and how silence, when kept too long, becomes the sharpest weapon in the hands of the forgotten. I am no hero. I'm just a woman who remembered. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone who was silenced too long, someone who deserves to be seen, then please, subscribe to Grandma True Stories, because the world has heard enough from the loudest voices. It's time they listen to the quiet ones, the ones who never forgot. Hit that subscribe button. Share this with someone who needs to know. Wisdom doesn't shout, it remembers. And here, we remember everything.